Hey everybody, it's Minius, and I've been sitting on this video probably for too long, but I wanted to give as many of you a chance to finish the game as possible, because this video has spoilers. A lot of spoilers. I'm going to spend tons of time going in depth on a bunch of story stuff, so you should know that watching this video will reveal almost the entire plot of Mass Effect Andromeda. I'm sure there are some of you out there who haven't played the game and might be watching this just out of pure curiosity, but you should be warned that watching this video will spoil things. But basically, Mass Effect Andromeda was not received well overall. Its final review score was less than 75 on Metacritic, and I could get into why review scores are stupid and stuff, but 75 is a very poor score for a AAA title. I expect that if this game was scored a 90, it would still be viewed as a disappointment. I mean, Mass Effect is a premier video game franchise, and the bar set by previous games is ridiculously high. Now, I like this game a lot more than most people, including my fellow BioWare YouTubers, which is weird, but even I admit that this game has some serious flaws. And I said in an earlier video that you can nitpick this game to death. That's not exactly true, because those nits that can be picked are really large enough to be more irritating than that. But there are two major issues that stand out to me that are well above the others. And they aren't technical. They can't be fixed with a patch or overhauled. They are fundamental cracks in the foundation of this game that hopefully won't permanently derail the franchise. And I go back and forth to myself about which is the larger issue, but I'll start here with the one that I haven't talked about before. And that's that this game holds back way too much story-wise. It's actually somewhat amusing how frequent this mistake is made for franchise starters, which is basically what Mass Effect Andromeda is, and they spend the entirety of the game setting up plot lines and don't appropriately finish them. I count at least 5 major plot lines that are unfinished, either partially or entirely, and that is way too many. We'll use the original Mass Effect as a comparison because that's basically the best game to stack this one up against. And do you know how many plot lines the original Mass Effect game left open? 1. And they explained where that was going in pretty solid detail. But let's get into all of these loose plot lines that are introduced, and they start as soon as the game starts. Your ship arrives in the Helios cluster and is stopped in its tracks by a crazy cloud of nasty-looking energy that's completely wreaked havoc on the entire region. The planet you intended to land on is really messed up, but you find some super advanced alien tech that fixes that. And these two plot points are fascinating. You spend almost the entirety of the game using this unknown remnant technology to fix the damage that the Scourge has had on these planets. So what do we end up knowing about the remnant by the end of the game? Almost nothing. Sure, we know they're called the Jardan, probably. We know their technology is centered around a terraforming network designed to make the Helios cluster extremely habitable. We know they created the Angara. We know they were chased off by a crazy space weapon and at least wanted to come back. And that might seem like a lot, but man, there are unanswered questions here. The most prominent question is, why did they do all of this? I mean, what is their motivation? And I suppose it could be because they felt like it, but Mass Effect Andromeda is a work of fiction, and that is extremely uninteresting and also not confirmed. Let's compare these Jardan to the Protheans, and I should sidestep for a second here because these remnant dudes simply had the work of the Jardan. They're called the Jardan in the Codex, but I suppose someone, or some other faction could have found that work, and this goes into more unanswered questions, but the comparison to the Protheans from the original trilogy is here. We knew a whole bunch more about the Protheans by the end of the first game. We know when they lived. We know where they lived. We know what they are capable of technologically. We know mostly how that technology works and where it came from. We know exactly how they died. We know exactly who killed them. We have a reasonable grasp for why they were killed, and we know exactly what they did with their final breaths and why. These Jardan, on the other hand, we kind of sort of know when they lived. We don't know where. They could be from anywhere. We get an idea of what they're capable of technologically, but we have no idea how that technology works. We don't know if they are still alive, or who drove them out of the region, or why, and perhaps most importantly, we have no idea what they were trying to do with this stuff. Why were the Angarans made? Why terraform a ridiculous amount of planets? I mean, what were these dudes doing? Perhaps equally as important as the Remnant or Jardan? are the people or faction that drove them out of the region with that crazy dark energy super weapon that is also completely unexplained. I mean, we know literally nothing about these people, who ultimately could end up being the main bad guys in Andromeda. They are referred to in the notes by the administrator of the massive remnant space station as the enemy, or more interestingly, the opposition, which I'll get into more in a sec. But these people could be another enemy race or alliance, they could be another government within the same species, they could be anything really. By comparison, in the original Mass Effect, we know who destroyed the Protheans. The enormous trash-talking machines named Reapers. We know they wiped out advanced civilizations before, and more importantly, we know that they're coming again. Right away. Is this opposition going to return? What are they trying to do? I don't know. Keep in mind that this mysterious energy cloud was literally the first story point that came up in the game when it stopped the Hyperion, and basically it's completely unresolved. And as the game dragged on, I kept thinking to myself, man, this game needs one big twist. I hope we get a big twist. And of course, we didn't. And in my opinion, what I'm about to do is actually the wrong way to go about things, because your own imagination is always going to come up with a story that you like better because it's tailored to you. But here's a twist option that I came up with. What if the creators of the Angara and the terraforming network did so for nefarious or outright evil reasons? What if they were setting up the Helios cluster as a base of operations to drive off or dominate the rest of the Andromeda galaxy, and that crazy dark energy death scourge cloud was deployed by desperate people just trying to save themselves? And that would mean that the remnant technology that you are using to save your people isn't there for good, and its creators almost certainly aren't cool with you using it, and are probably going to come back and try to kick your ass for messing with it, which would force you to find the developers of that scourge as allies. Now that is a twist worthy of Mass Effect. There's even a little bit of evidence towards this. I mean, the language that the administrator of the Remnant Station uses is weird. I'm even using Remnant here because I think there's a legitimate chance that these builders stole or even found the technology of the Jardin. There are movies and games and books and shows that are completely built around a major twist. In essence, something like this would make the game. It also comes with the additional bonus of the Angarans needing to decide their own path. Do we stick with our evil creators or fight them? And just what a missed opportunity. And there are other equally interesting possibilities for background or twists in the stories here, each of which would have made Mass Effect Andromeda a much better game. And keep in mind, things might still turn out that way. They just don't get into these Jardin or their motivations or the motivations of their enemies. This information was withheld for future games when it was really needed to establish Mass Effect Andromeda as a franchise. In my opinion, this is a big enough error already, but the mysteries of the Jardin, or Remnant, and their enemy are just 2 unfinished plot lines, and I mentioned at least 5, which is absolutely nuts. Let's talk about the Kett. Some of the most interesting story stuff in Mass Effect Andromeda revolved around who the Kett were and what they wanted. And I don't mean what the Archon wanted. That dude seemed to be doing his own thing and ultimately was a very poor reflection of his kind. If you spare the creepy witch religious zealot Kett lady, she'll make that clear. But we do know the Kett aren't originally from the Helios cluster. We know they have an empire of sorts and basically snatch other people's as a way to reproduce. And that stuff's really interesting, but kind of pushed off to the side, and more importantly, the fate is left open at the end of the game. And how large is the Kett Empire? Are they likely to come back? Will they do so in force? We knew more about the Reapers after the first Mass Effect game than we know about the Kett motivations now. What about the plotline around the creation of the Andromeda Initiative, which to me was by far the most interesting thing in the entire game, though I'm a little bit biased here, being fascinated with previous Mass Effect lore. And BioWare handled the reasons behind why this trip was created in about the best way possible, then completely stopped exploring anything to do with the subject. And let's go into this. It was revealed that the Andromeda Initiative was originally created for exploration purposes, but was accelerated because its creators discovered the Reapers were coming to the Milky Way, and they needed to get the fuck out of there before they arrived. And they did so just in time. But Ryder talks about this with literally nobody. There's a missed opportunity here deciding whether or not to tell people that the society they left in the Milky Way might very well be dead, and it could have led to some very interesting story or decision stuff, but they take this further. There is a shady backer that funds this acceleration to leave the Milky Way. Both the Ryder dad and Jien Garson, who founded the initiative, were super uncomfortable with this person, who then murders Garson for some reason. That's evil, nefarious, interesting, but left completely unexplored for some reason. Probably because it's DLC or something, but again, what a missed opportunity. In fairness to BioWare on this plot point, going into it too much probably would have distracted from the main plot line, but this evil backer and his or her motivations to leave the Milky Way could have served as a fascinating second plot line that could have been tied to the ultimate outcome of the game. Instead, it's just another story thread that's left completely untied. There's also the matter of the missing Ark, for some reason led by Quarians, instead of the much more numerous and well-off Volus, Hanor, and Elcor, and they're lost and under attack by an unknown foe, possibly the Kett, possibly the Unleashers of the Scourge, possibly the Jardin, possibly another faction. Who knows? You are going to have to wait to find out, almost certainly with the DLC story pack, which I'd be okay with if there weren't so many other plot lines that were still open. This goes into the crux of why this is one of the two major mistakes in the game. You cannot simply create a game or initial franchise piece with the sole or primary accomplishment to set up more games or future DLC. The mystery behind the Remnant Jardin, their enemies, the Kett, the Andromeda Initiative, and the Lost Ark are all fascinating, but absolutely needed to be completed to make this initial game more interesting. People will not accept a story whose main function is to sell future products, and by all indications, people haven't. And man, those are just 5 plot lines that are unresolved. I mean, the Ryder mother is alive and uncured. That's something that's in the air. The Ryder dad is dead, but there's no body, and this is going to annoy some of you, but when there's no body in science fiction or fantasy, that often means that the character isn't dead, and they could have tied this up. Why didn't your writer go back for the body? Especially when it was found out that the Kett like to mess with DNA stuff and are super fascinated with remnant technology, which your dad solved, which would make his remains extremely interesting to them. And humans have shown reverence for the bodies of their fallen leaders, or just friends, for tens of thousands of years. Wouldn't you go back for your father's body? It's going to be really dumb if he turns out to be alive in some form. As I wrap up my point of this first major mistake in Mass Effect Andromeda of leaving way too many plot lines unfinished, I want to remind you that the original Mass Effect had one plot line left, at least after its initial release, and that was, the Reapers are coming. And they are coming now, and they want to kill you. Easily more defined than any of the untied plot lines that this game has left open. Now, I'm sure you can find hints to where some of these plot lines are headed buried in the codex or off the path in conversations, but you can't hide stuff like that in a game. Mass Effect Andromeda was in desperate need of a solid launch, and leaving all of these plot lines on the table makes this initial product, well, unfinished at best. But let's examine the second major mistake, which I've talked about in brief before, and it's pretty much just as large, if not larger than my first issue, and that's that the pacing of this game is way off. And think of how important pacing is in storytelling, or anything really. You can come up with something fantastic, but if your content is too spread out, it just doesn't work. And the extreme openness of Mass Effect Andromeda does far more damage to the game than is readily apparent to most people, in my opinion. It takes way too long to jump from story point to story point, or even from combat section to combat section. It's just too slow. Let's compare this again to the original trilogy. You do a mission which is compact and has a bunch of action, and then you can screw around and or talk with your crew before you head to another mission which starts up instantly. In Andromeda, there is a third step: traversing the open world. I like open world games a lot. I like exploring a lot. But I think it's pretty clear that a game with this much story, and probably more specifically, this many sizable characters to interact with, does not go with exploration on this scale. I can't think of a game that successfully pulled that off. I mean, probably the third Witcher game comes the closest, though there are far fewer characters and much less dialogue. And the same thing goes for the Grand Theft Auto series. I think Mass Effect Andromeda would have benefited by cutting that exploration out, or more specifically limiting it to the way that it was handled in the original Mass Effect, but probably better off like Mass Effects 2 and 3. That would allow the story to snap from point to point, keeping up the pacing necessary for something like this, and more importantly for this game, because its combat was so frickin' good, significantly shorten the time between encounters with enemies. Well-designed missions or levels with 15 to 30 minutes of combat just works better than screwing around in the open world and traveling from place to place. The drag on both the story and combat is noticeable and fundamental. Ultimately, this game ends up being crushed by its own weight. This mistimed pacing due to the game's open world and its lack of finishing up intriguing plot lines are both fundamental cracks to this game's foundation. I have no doubt that the smaller issues that this game has would be more easily overlooked if it had a more solid foundation, and the resulting product has me nervous. Even though this video was overwhelmingly negative, I like this game a lot more than most people, which goes into mostly how much I like the combat system. And that combat system and the unanswered questions I go over in this video desperately make me want another game, and how well this game is performing critically has put it in jeopardy. Mass Effect needed a solid new game to continue. The poorly received, well, basically disastrous ending to the original trilogy put the franchise in a tough spot, and a poor effort could easily finish off the franchise or at least bury it for a long time. I'm sure Electronic Arts would like to make more games. I mean, I spent at least 10 minutes on this video talking about plot lines this game set up and didn't finish, but man, the negativity surrounding this game is just flat out awful. All of the trolls are out and they're throwing poop all over the place, and the sheer amount of poop in the air might just convince EA to drop the series. That's disappointing, but completely understandable, especially if this game underperforms financially, which it might be doing. I'll spend a lot of the next month or so chatting about the future of Mass Effect and BioWare and dodging poop that people are throwing, but I think it's fair to say that I did not think that I would be doing these kind of videos, and not particularly happy to do them, though they're needed. Minius GC is a Mass Effect channel, and well, Mass Effect is in a tough spot. But if you like this video, please give it a like. It really helps out the channel. Keep an eye on Minius GC for more Mass Effect videos. But for now...
That's all. Thanks for your time.
I'm happy to help. You will find our futures depend on each other's success. Good luck.